I and Benzie. I'm the youngest of the 3 Jennings kids, and this is where we grew up, remarkably.
And I'm Sally Jennings Eason, the oldest. And there's just not quite 5 years between Benzie and me, and Dickie sandwiched in the middle. Okay. And this is where we grew up, and it was pretty awesome. And our dad raised mink and trout here. That's all I remember. I don't remember anything prior to that. And it didn't look like this then. There was no clearing done really, except to put the mink sheds over there and clearing for the trout stuff later. But our house was up there.
Sorry, this is what sisters do.
Yeah, thank you, honey. Where that old chimney stands was our original house, and it was tiny, tiny. It's behind that pine tree.
We'll have to get that later.
Yeah.
And it was identical to the little caretaker's house, which you see over on the drive there.
Cool.
And that's the house we grew up in and played out in the woods all day, every day. I don't think our parents ever saw us from sunup to sundown, hardly.
Oh my gosh.
And it was when we ended up going to school in Asheville, because there was a one-room schoolhouse here. And I just remember being struck by Halloween, because we didn't have Halloween here because we didn't have any neighbors, so you can't have Halloween. And you know, as time went on and we got older and more mature, we started realizing how our upbringing here was so vastly different from everybody else's. And the older we got, the more we realized how lucky we were.
Wow.
Yeah. We didn't know what white bread was until we were about 10.
Really?
That was pretty cool. Yeah. Our mom was a health nut way before her time.
And a lot of that maybe just because she had to do a lot here, because to go to the store was a big deal.
Yeah.
And they did have a oil heat furnace, but they did a lot of heating with wood. And anyway.
When did you guys, did you call it Lonesome Valley back in the day? You did?
Yeah, the stone pillars that are out there at the gate now were here well before we were born. I don't know when they were built. I think Pa had them built in the 40s.
And there was some story. I mean, he didn't pick that name out of a hat. Somebody had written those words somewhere in this valley. And there's some lore, who knows what's true, but that somebody had spent the night here. And, or maybe longer than a night, we don't know, and had written those words on a tree or a stump.
This shore is a lonesome valley.
Yeah.
What it says.
Oh, really?
S-H-O-R-E.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. That's worth it right there.
Yeah.
And then when did you guys sort of move on to different places and left Lonesome Valley?
I had just finished 2nd grade, so I did go to the one-room schoolhouse for 1st and 2nd grades, and my grandmother thought I was turning into a little redneck. So she said, well, I'm going to take her to school in Asheville for a year. We'll see how that goes. And so I thought it was great. I loved it. I think my mom was devastated, but didn't argue with Graham. And so I went for that year, and then Mom and Dad saw that was maybe a good thing, so then they wound up moving to Asheville the next year with Dickie and Benzie, and they're so close in age they started preschool together. But because they were like Irish twins and were always in cahoots about something, they tried to drown the little girl in the bathroom, so they separated them. And so that's
little girl.
I know. I'm friends with her on Facebook now, though.
Oh,
really? Yeah.
That's funny.
So anyway, that was it. So.
But to interject, Daddy had a mink farm. I mean, that's how he made a living. And so just because we were going to school, he was still working here.
Yeah.
What is a mink farm?
What is it?
Yeah.
Well, there were 6,000 mink, and they were all in, their individual little cages. And at the end of the season, like in the springtime, the mink some of them would be killed, and their pelts would be cleaned here on the farm.
That's actually when they had their babies, and they were pelted in the late fall.
Wow.
See, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Well, that's just because I'm older. That's the only reason I remember that.
Do people still have mink farms? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, not so much not so much anywhere anymore, because it's just not in vogue. The animal rights folks, rightly so, said, wait a minute, is this really a good idea to be just slaughtering animals for a luxury item?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't a good idea. And Paul didn't think it was a good idea either when he thought about it after a few years.
Yeah.
So I think he was fine with letting go of it.
Huh.
But I never had a problem with it. And I still wish I had a mink coat, and I'm a little bitter about that. But really, I mean, that was what dominates my memory of childhood, is the mink farm. There was that whole hill was covered with mink and a slaughterhouse, and I tried to make pets of baby mink over and over and over again. I was convinced I could do it. They were the cutest little things, like a pinto bean.
Yeah.
And before they had fur, and I'd take them home and hide them in a glove, some kind of a box, and try to make friends with them, and they would bite your finger off the first chance they got. As soon as they got these little neat little
Really?
teeth.
So they couldn't be tamed?
Not at all.
Very vicious.
Wow.
And I don't know if it's that or just having a slaughterhouse and seeing meat prepared for animals, that it never freaked me out or made me feel guilty about killing animals for their pelts. So I just come at it from a real different perspective.
Yeah.
I remember Daddy used to go to furrier conventions in New York every year and sell his furs. And one year they were there, and this was in the late 60s or early 70s, I guess, and somebody threw paint on some of the furs. And that's when he saw the writing on the wall and realized that the world had turned and nobody was going to buy fur anymore like they did in the Doris Day years.
Yeah.
And but we had a wardrobe in the kitchen of our house, and it had about 4 or 5 different styles and colors of mink, and they were just spectacular.
Really?
One in particular was white, and
Wow.
it's called Jasmine, and it was full length on a normal human being, and I was only 6. And Dickie and I decided it would be good to go out in the pasture, the cow pasture, and take pictures of me in the white jasmine coat.
So you still have those?
I bet you don't remember that was the day that the president of Emba Furs came down to visit Pa.
Oh.
I don't remember. I don't remember it at all. I just remember how soft and luxurious it was.
Well, they took a picture of you on the front walkway in that fur, and it's all, down around the ground and stuff, and that was on the cover of Emba Fur magazine that year.
My gosh.
That's awesome.
Do you think the family still has it?
No, because our house burned down and everything in it.
This house did?
And that's where it was.
Oh, when was that? Did you just...
Teenagers. I was 16.
It was 72, and Steve and I had just married here, and it was 6 weeks after our wedding. So,
Oh, gosh.
yeah.
And so it was never rebuilt? The remains of the fireplace?
No, Mom and Dad didn't really know what to do. They needed time to think about it, so they brought in a mobile home and put it on the hill there for 4 years. And when they came up here, they just stayed there and thought about it. And meanwhile, Steve and I had decided to move here, and he was going to work for Dad on the trout farm here. And since he was here and Dickie was back here from NC State, Dickie and Dad, I guess, and Steve decided in unison, well, hey, we'll build a house. We'll build a old farmhouse here. So that's what they came up with. They had a rough sketch from an architect friend in Asheville, but basically they built it with the help of some really wonderful carpenters here in Cashers.
And they used the wood from the property, and I remember them. Daddy is all about doing things himself, and so he had a vat. He built a vat. He put some kind of a liquid in it that would preserve all the wood. And so it is treated.
Is this the house?
That's it.
Oh, okay.
It didn't look like that at all. It's been through about 3 or 4 different iterations.
Yeah.
And
Well, the roof line's the same.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess you would say structurally it's the same. It's just cosmetic changes, right?
Right. The flooring has changed. They did switch out the windows and the doors several years ago.
And wasn't it red in the first place?
Yeah, it was a different color now. But generally speaking, it's the same. And it's neat that the guys built it.
Yeah.
It took forever, but they
And
built it.
It's been fun since we've done what we've done with Luntz Valley to have that house still here in basically its natural state. Just a little bit nicer, but it's still fun. I still think of that as home when I walk in there, don't you?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I lived there when all 3 of my kids were babies, so it was at one point home, and Benzie certainly spent a lot of time there traveling back and forth from Ohio. And did you live there some?
Yes. After I got divorced, I lived here. Dickie
thought
was
so.
upstairs.
That's right. Yeah.
He and his wife and 2 children were upstairs, and at that point there was a partition that would close off the upstairs from the downstairs, and I was living downstairs. And I can tell you some stories, but we'd have to turn the video off.
Now,
Yeah.
what do you have for children now?
Well, they all got real big
Yeah,
and real tall.
they do that.
And one is 36, and the next one is 32, and the next one is 30. 2 boys and then a girl. And they all went off to college and left this country and lived elsewhere. And all 3 of them, lo and behold, came back and went into the trout business with us, which was my dad's business here,
Wow.
alongside the mink. So they all work with us, and they all got married, and one of them got divorced, but the 2 who are still married, their spouses also work in the trout business. So it's a
Wow.
whole family.
That is cool.
And back when the mink farm was Daddy's bread and butter, he always had rainbow trout and a hatchery up at the head of the valley, sort of as a hobby.
Yeah.
And he started out just stocking ponds, and it was just an interest. And even when he was 18, his family built and ran Fairfield Inn, which was a cool old inn with a big wraparound porch and a lake overlooking Camp Marywood. And his father let my dad and his brother open the inn in the spring, and he was supposed to come and join them in May or June, but he surprised them and came several weeks early. And when he arrived, my father had all of the bathtubs stopped up with fish in them, trout of different varieties. So he started his research when he was 18, and he and his brother were riding horses in the lobby of the hotel.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they were being bad boys.
I think I've heard that story elsewhere.
You may have. It's known far and wide, I guess. But anyway, Daddy had an interest in all kinds of trout, but he somehow, I don't know why, he prefers rainbow.
They were just easier than brook and Green. They're
Okay.
not easy, but they're easier
Uh-huh.
to raise.
And then when he liquidated the mink farm, he thought, well, you know what, I'm going to try to make a go of this trout business because everybody seems to enjoy eating it and it's healthy. And I guess and Sally's the one who talked about all this, how the timing couldn't have been better in terms of discovering cholesterol and red meat as
yeah.
opposed to fish and aquaculture.
So what, that been in the 80s?
Yeah, it really took off then, I would say. In 85, Steve and I had been here for 10 years, and he was just doing the hatching. And we had saved enough money that we could build a house here, so we just finished a solar house in December of 84. And in May of 84, Paul called Steve and said, Steve, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to move to Haywood County with Sal and the kids, because I really need somebody to be there to take that business over for me. And Steve says, wow, I didn't see that one coming. And he said, I'll have to talk to Sal and we'll let you know. So we talked about it. It was about a 5-minute discussion. And we said, we'll keep this house, if we can afford it. And
Yeah.
we'll make it work. So we did. Great decision. Never, ever looked back on that decision as a bad one. But we certainly have enjoyed having this old solar house that's so dated, to still come back to. And our children love it. And but Haywood County was a great place to be, too.
Is that the one you were talking to Thomas about earlier, Sunburst? Is that
Sunburst is the trout farm, which
Okay.
yes, which is in. It was Jennings Trout Farm for obvious reasons from its inception until the mid-90s, and a group of college students who were business majors at Warren Wilson, I think, came to do an internship or whatever at the farm, a senior project actually. And they said, there's not much we would change, but if you have any vision to expand in the future and branch out, you might want to think about a name that isn't quite so mom and pop. So we thought about that for a year or so and batted it around and thought, this is the old Sunburst logging community where that trout farm is, and thought that'd be a cool name to use. So we named it Sunburst.
Oh, that's cool. Now, did y'all ever have any contact as young girls with Marywood next door?
No.
Not really. Our cousin went
Yeah.
there, but she lived in Georgia.
Uh-huh.
So for her, it made tons of sense. For us, we were just on the other side of the mountain.
We
Why
were
go to
camp.
camp? Why to go to camp in your backyard?
We lived
We
at
are
camp.
camp.
Yeah, that's right.
But
And they-
our cousin did go there.
And one of their horse trails brought them over the saddle between Laurel Knob and Cow Rock, and they would ride over here, and it was always fun seeing them.
Yeah.
And then when we were teenagers, Sapphire Valley, the ski slope and that whole community put in stables across the street from our
remember
stone pillars.
Yeah.
And I was only probably 10, 11, 12, 13 those years, but Sally was 16, 15, that age. And all those boys that lived and worked over there were really cute. And and she and her friends would go and let those horses out at night
Oh
and
my
shoo them over
gosh.
here onto this property. And
You know, theoretically, anybody in the world, I could just see Mr. Lewis rolling over in his grave right now.
I know.
I knew those girls
Oh,
did
that's ingenious.
I know. And then our father would say, call up those stable hands and tell them to come get those horses off my property. So they would.
Okay, Dad.
And it happened almost every weekend. Daddy never wised up.
That's funny.
And there were always cold beers for those boys.
To this
after their
day,
hard
to
work.
this day, does he know?
I think, yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Oh.
we've joked about it
Oh,
in front
okay.
of him. He's like, I should have known.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's better than those internet dating sites.
Oh, totally.
So that brings me back to the point that even though we were in Asheville in school, weekends we came back here because Daddy was working the farm, and all summers we were here. All Thanksgiving and Christmas, any time that we weren't in school, we were here because this was home. And Mom and Daddy were so awesome. They realized once we became socialized in the school in Asheville and had friends, that to pull us away from all that was kind of a bummer for us. So they let us all have a friend stay for the summer.
Oh,
And it had to be friends that had some guts because they were made to work
Oh,
for
wow.
25 cents an hour.
really?
Shoveling,
Yeah.
it was either mink manure or later on gutting fish. It was not pretty work.
Yeah.
And none of it smelled good.
Did you have anybody take you up on your summer
Yes,
off?
every summer we had a house full of kids.
Really?
Awesome.
Wow.
In that little tiny house.
Oh, gosh.
Dominated with horseback riding. I mean, I don't even remember working in any of the drudgery. I just remember fun,
Yeah.
and some more fun.
Gosh.
It was awesome.
Well, in those early days of growing up here in the woods, as you said, this was all forest, right? It wasn't really cultivated. It wasn't cropland.
Right.
How did the rock play into your early childhood? Was there any interest in
We
it?
didn't know it was there.
Really?
Literally.
Yeah. It was just so far back.
Yeah, and this was just thick. I mean, we had a garbage pit about probably 100 feet from the house. Because back then you certainly didn't have garbage service,
Yeah.
didn't have any of the stuff we have today, so you buried your trash.
Yeah.
That's just what you did. And to go to our garbage pit, it seemed like a hike through the woods that would take half
Half
a day.
the day, yeah.
And in reality, I can see it from here. So if the garbage pit was that far, you dang sure know how far those cliffs were.
Yeah.
When I was 12 is when Paul started clearing this. And the reason he did was there was a gentleman from Cashers, George J. Stewart.
And Ed Cluett.
Yeah, I forgot about Ed. Who had become sort of partners in some way or another with him. And I guess it was Ed who came down here one day and said, you know, Dick, it wouldn't smell so bad here and you wouldn't have this horrible fly problem if you'd cut some of these trees.
And get some wind through the valley.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And Paul thought, I think he took offense at first, probably.
Yeah.
But then he, started clearing, and I mean, it was his project, and he would do it sort of piecemeal. But honestly, one time I remember coming up here and going, where'd that rock come from?
Oh, really?
And all this area, because it was really closed in
Yeah.
around the house we grew up in.
Yeah.
It seemed small.
Wow.
And we had no idea that we had so much land.
And we hiked all the time with our dad, but they were always silent hikes. And he would stop and tell us something when he wanted us to learn something, about a plant or about a snake or something. Otherwise, we didn't talk.
Yeah.
You just knew you don't talk when you're hiking with Paul.
Wow.
And we hiked miles and miles and miles of this valley, but never became aware of its vastness, I don't think.
No.
We were aware of other things, but not the vastness.
Let's go to. We can always come back to jump in with any thought that comes into your mind. But what do you know about the history of this valley before your family acquired it? Anything?
The only thing I know is that there were, and this is the part that Dad could give you the name just like that, there were 3 or 4 old Cashers families who had pieces of this. Perhaps just peripherally, but I know Dillard was one of them. I know that Fugit was one, and I can't remember the other 2 families. Can you?
No. It was called Dillard Canyon.
The whole valley was?
Because this actually is a canyon. You know, when you have this kind of rock coming around like a horseshoe, it becomes a canyon. So, and it was that Dillard family for whom it was named. And I think that I'm probably going back to the mid-1800s when I'm using those names and those circumstances. So I guess when our great-grandfather came down here from Pennsylvania and fancied that this would someday become a vacation spot for wealthy folks from the Northeast, he began to buy up little parcels, and he picked up partners as time went by and invested with other folks, and land was unbelievably cheap then. Plus there was a lot of bartering, so, you know, he probably bought it piecemeal. Well, I know he did. From
$4 an acre.
Yeah.
May have been a lot back then. I don't know. And that was in the 1800s.
Okay.
So prior to that, just some homesteaders would come through and live for a while. But I remember Daddy saying that planting here and crop growth is not really possible because we're on granite. And the root system, it just isn't there. Couldn't be here.